previously written in an article entitled, quote, "Why Not to Attack Iran." And in 2012, he wrote that putting boots on the ground would, quote, "likely prove protracted and costly." President Trump and Secretary Hegseth have left the door open to putting boots on the ground. Do you agree with them now? Do you agree with Secretary Rubio that the reason that we took this action now was because of Israel's intent to strike?
I would defer to Secretary Rubio. The president has, obviously, as he's discussed.
I don't want to know what the president, I've heard what the president said. I want to know what you think.
Well, I'm a lieutenant of the president, so I'm keyed on his intent.
You're not going to take a position on that. Whatever the president decides, you're going to be supportive of.
Yeah, I will.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under Secretary Colby, you've previously written that the Middle East is, and I quote, "relatively unimportant for the United States." You also wrote in an article entitled, quote, "Why Not to Attack Iran," that strikes against Iran's nuclear program without a clear strategy would leave, quote, "Tehran every incentive to reboot the program with greater vigor." You wrote in the same article that military strikes were unlikely to, quote, "embolden resistance to the government." And you concluded by noting that it's probably best not to start down a road that has no end in sight. And then in 2012, you wrote that putting boots on the ground would, quote, "likely prove protracted and costly." President Trump and Secretary Hegseth have left the door open to putting boots on the ground. Do you agree with them now, and why?
Thank you, Senator. A couple of things. First, we discussed this at some length, actually almost exactly a year ago in my confirmation hearing, and I committed to provide credible military options that were rationally correlated to Americans' interests, and I have done so in furtherance of that commitment. And I believe
I'm sorry to interrupt, but
Sure.
Then do you agree with Secretary Rubio that the reason that we took this action now was because of Israel's intent to strike? And was there any effort to dissuade Israel from making these strikes now?
Well, I would defer to Secretary Rubio on his specific comments. I know he and others, the president, the vice president, secretary, chairman, have all talked about the threat that Iran has posed. And I was clear about that in my testimony a year ago. We've been clear about that here. I would say Operation Midnight Hammer did have a clear objective, and that was something that was distinguished it often from the kinds of perspectives that I was writing about 15 years ago in a private capacity.
So you do agree with him now that putting boots on the ground is a possible,
well, I mean, the president has reserved the right to
option.
The president has, obviously, as he's discussed.
I don't want to know what the president, I've heard what the president said. I want to know what you think.
Well, I'm a lieutenant of the president, so I'm keyed on his intent. I think.
So you're not going to take a position on that. Whatever the president decides, you're going to be supportive of.
Yeah, I will abide by the president's instructions.
Let me switch to another issue, because in your opening statement, you didn't mention Russia or Ukraine, and this is the largest land war in Europe since World War II. Do you think that it's central to U.S. deterrence or not?
I think the war in Ukraine is very important. Obviously, as the president has rightly said, obviously it's especially vivid and important for people on the European continent, which is where it's taking, which is one of the reasons why he's, I think, really, to his great credit, trying to end the war, and the negotiating team that's working. I think they're making good progress. But yeah, I absolutely think the war in Ukraine is important.
They would be making a lot better progress if we put some pressure on Russia, don't you agree? And has Russia had any role in supporting Iran in this operation?
I couldn't speak about that in this hearing, or it would be I'd be happy to discuss that in a closed hearing, my assessment of that, although I'd defer to my intelligence community colleagues on the specifics. But sorry, your first question was pressure. I mean, the administration has put pressure on Russia, for instance, through economic measures. And the administration, I personally have been involved, contrary to a lot of press reporting, in facilitating the transfer of weaponry to help Ukraine. So I think the administration is. But the goal is peace, Senator.
I certainly agree with that. And I think the fastest way to get peace in Ukraine is to put more pressure on Russia and Vladimir Putin and what he's doing in this war, and that the way to do that is to further sanction the shadow fleet, further sanction oil production. It is to provide the weapons and the support that Ukraine needs to continue to execute this war. And sadly, we are not doing that in the way that I think would really lead us to peace. Let me ask you, because I just came back from Ukraine, and one of the things I heard, and from Eastern Europe, one of the things I heard from all of the military leaders that I talked to, both American and among our allies, is that what the Ukrainians are doing in executing this war is the most highly innovative technological advances that are happening in conflict anywhere in the world right now. And we are not at the table to take advantage of getting the best information about what's going on, because in the Pentagon, Ukraine has become a dirty word. Can you respond to that and tell me why we are not taking advantage of the opportunities that Ukraine is showing us?
I just don't think that's true, Senator. I think people like Secretary Driscoll, for instance, are incorporating a lot of lessons learned, and there's a lot to learn from the Ukraine conflict, a great deal to learn from the Ukraine conflict.
Good. I hope we are learning. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Rounds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Colby, first of all, thank you for joining us today. I sincerely appreciate the attention you and your team have paid to the simultaneity problem in the National Defense Strategy. The simultaneity problem is the fact that in the event the United States is engaged in hostilities with one of our adversaries, other adversaries and other theaters will likely initiate hostilities with us and seek to press their advantage in their region or theater after U.S. forces are committed elsewhere. You and your team seem acutely aware of that problem. I also appreciate that the department is trying to maintain deterrence in multiple theaters with finite resources, and that protecting our interests in the Western Pacific must be the priority in the face of the existential threat posed by the CCP. That's the background for my questions. The National Defense Strategy places a heavy emphasis on burden sharing with our partners and allies. Is it the position of the administration and the intent of the NDS to build up partner and ally capacity prior to shifting resources out of a theater, such as Europe or the Middle East? And if we could ask it in perhaps a different way, how do you think the department should sequence the marshaling of resources and the capacity between Indo-PACOM and the rest of the world?
Well, thank you, Senator, and I appreciate the spirit of your question, because I think you exactly understand what we're trying to do. And I think, one thing about the strategy is it's obviously a high-level capstone document. And I think, Senator Fisher, I think you said it's a living document, or maybe it's the chairman. But basically, it's more of a heuristic or a framework. Obviously the publication is a point in time, but the idea is it should be adaptive to events like it came out before Operation Epic Fury, but I think it accounts and anticipates for it. So I think what I would say, sir, to your point is we are trying to get to the best point where everybody is in the right position to deter, obviously, ideally, and if necessary, to fight effectively for denial as soon as possible, and certainly within the window of any potential danger. And so part of what's happening, Senator, and I think this is part of what's changed early this year from our tone, and I think our partners have noticed it, I regard 2025 as a lot of it is about reframing and giving our allies and partners credibly under the president's leadership an understanding that things are going to be different, that the demand signal is different. And a lot of that was a hypothesis whether they would change and whether they would register. And I think what we've seen over the course of 2025 is that they are not fighting the scenario. So in Europe, I was just there at the DEFMIN. You have countries like Germany, Poland, Finland, Sweden, Norway, et cetera. Netherlands is now raising the retirement age, according to what I'm told, to 70 in order to fund their defense buildup. So they are actually doing what we've been asking. And so the change in tone is because actually things have now adapted. Now it's more this get down to business. And that's when it becomes, Senator, to answer your question directly, more a matter of how do we deal with a transition in a situation in which, as the president said yesterday, there are areas where we would like to be in a different place than we are. And that's where we want to take the conversation. I am confident that together across the Department of War and our very capable allies and partners, we can do that. But it's very important to send a clear signal that this is not a joke. This is not a recipe for more lassitude by our allies. And I think that's happened.
Okay. There is strong support in Congress to provide additional resources to our national defense. Engagement between the administration and Congress is critical to identifying and addressing the resource shortfalls. Have you shared with Congress any specific resource shortfalls or capability gaps that will cause us to assume additional risk as the NDS is implemented?
Well, actually, that's some of the sort of implementation work that we're doing right now, especially in light of, ongoing, dynamics, is to try. Actually, I was talking to the chairman and his staff about this yesterday, just to say we are doing some targeted looks at this, and I definitely would like to come back to you because some of this needs, and I think it's something that would appeal across the aisle where we all benefit from having the right stuff in the right place at the right time. So, my personal advocacy will be open kimono on what we find on that, because it's obviously your participation is absolutely critical.
Well, that open kimono should probably be done in a classified session.
For your sake, yes.
Here, here.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.